How do you make something bad seem not so bad? By comparing it to something much, much worse.
We were at the toll booth at the Henry Hudson Parkway, okay? And there were this pack of extremely wild teenagers in a convertible behind us, okay? And for some reason, I don't know, they just started to taunt us. And so then we paid the toll, and then we went through, and then they started to follow us, all right? So George tries to lose them, but they were in this really like a souped up car, you know? And so he turned off the road really suddenly, and the car was on two wheels, and I was just screaming. And George is such a great driver.
He is?
Oh, he is fantastic. And then they fired a gun right up in the air.
A gun?
I think it was a gun. And then they followed us all the way into the city, and then they just stopped, and they turned around, and they went home.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm all right. God.
Man, gee.
Oh, by the way, the car hit a pothole and now it's making a clanking noise.
Oh, well, I mean, as long as you're okay,
This technique is called anchoring. People tend to rely on the first piece of information they learn and make judgments in relation to it. This is why pricing plans often start with the highest price. They actually make more profit this way compared to starting with the cheapest price. The anchoring technique has been used to downplay the severity of COVID-19 deaths in the US. One appropriate way to assess whether the US has done a good job fighting the pandemic is an apples-to-apples comparison. Europe and the US both started similarly, with COVID cases rising quickly. Europe managed to crush the curve. In contrast, the US wasn't able to crush the curve. While cases were still high, they reopened the country, causing an even greater spike in cases. An apples-to-apples comparison does not paint a rosy picture for the US. Another way to rate the performance of the government is to compare what happened with what might have happened if the government had acted sooner. Columbia University estimated that if we'd started social distancing measures 2 weeks earlier, it would have prevented over 50,000 COVID deaths. But instead of these appropriate comparisons, the government uses an extreme form of anchoring.
We saved tens of thousands of lives, hundreds of thousands of lives. We saved millions of lives by doing that. Don't let anyone ever tell you different. We saved millions of lives. 1 million, 2 million, 2.5 million, those are all reasonable numbers to what we could have had.
We are far below 2.2 million dead Americans because of the actions of President Trump.
I think it could have been 2.5 or 3 million people.
The 2.2 million figure comes from Imperial College in London, who estimated that if nothing was done in response to the pandemic, no government action, no staying at home, no changes in behaviour, then 2.2 million Americans would die. In this hypothetical scenario, the population carried on normally, with no social distancing, no hand washing, and no mask wearing, even as millions were dying. Obviously, this is an implausible worst-case scenario, but it's used as an anchor to downplay 130,000 deaths. You can avoid being misled by being aware of the technique of anchoring. Remember that every time you hear how the government has saved millions of lives, their performance is being compared to a fantasy scenario where the government has done nothing and people are acting like nothing is happening while millions are dying around them. Rating the government's performance as better than nothing is an extremely low standard to expect from the nation's leader.
Oh, by the way, the car hit a pothole and now it's making a clanking noise.
Oh, well, I mean, as long as you're okay, that's the important thing.